Hi, my name is Frank Mayle and I'm from the University of Reading in the UK, and I'm co-leading a large research project which is called Human Environment Relationships in Pre-Columbian Amazonia. So this is co-funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK and FAPESP, which is a funding body for the state of Sao Paulo in Brazil. So I'm co-leading this project with Eduardo Neves, who's an archaeologist based in Sao Paulo. And we've got several co-investigators in the project as well, so University of Sao Paulo, and also other universities in Brazil, and in Switzerland and Germany, and in the UK. So it's a large interdisciplinary team of researchers that we have here. So what we're trying to do in a nutshell is to try and understand human environmental interactions in southwestern Amazonia as in different kinds of ecosystem, in terms of the amount of forest versus savanna, the types of rivers, the types of soil. So changes across space, but also changes through time. So how these ecosystems have been changing over thousands of years, and in the context of past climatic changes, and to really try and understand how humans have been using these natural resources. How have they been managing their landscape? So what kind of diets did they have? So how did complex societies, stratified societies develop? So what was that process of cultural change and development? The extent to which that was constrained by the environment or facilitated by it? And when and how did they actually disappear? So when were these sites abandoned? So did that all happen when Europeans arrived, or did that happen beforehand? There's increasing evidence to suggest, or to actually tell us, that some of these sites were actually abandoned at least 1 or 2 centuries before the arrival of Europeans. So let me just walk around this side. What we're standing on at the moment is a huge shell mound called Monte Castello in the state of Rondônia. This has been excavated over several field seasons, and it's been demonstrated that this spans the last 6,000 years of continuous human occupation, and huge concentrations of edible freshwater snails are found here. So that was a key resource for the people living here among the seasonally flooded savanna landscape that we see around us. So let me walk you through what's going on. So the team over here is led by Francisco Pugliese, University of Brasilia, and we've got Myrtle Schock here, an archaeobotanist. So Francisco is an archaeologist. We've got PhD students, we've got postdocs, we've got other researchers here, as well as members of the indigenous community that are excavating here at this site. So they're excavating now down to a cemetery where lots of skeletal remains of humans have been found. And the idea is to try and analyze these skeletons and to try and learn what their diet was, what were they consuming, the process of burial, so what kind of culture were they, so how did they use their resources. Okay, what's going on over here? A huge amount of ceramics are being recovered from these sites. So this is probably the richest site anywhere in Amazonia in terms of the amount and the preservation of faunal remains, so bones of a whole range of animals, a huge variety of species of fish, mammals, reptiles, birds, a whole very diverse fauna have been consumed here over centuries and millennia. Here we've got Jenny Watling, University of Sao Paulo, who's separating out these finds into these different classes. So we can see in this tray over here, we've got an assortment of all of these vertebrate bones. All of these faunal remains, animal remains have been discovered. We've got lots of fruits, carbonized particles of charcoal particles in here, and we've got ceramics over here. So these are the three different types of material which are being sorted out from the soil that's been excavated from the site on the top of the mound. Okay. And over to the left here, let me put this down for now. And over to the left, you can see all the samples being laid out. These have all been washed for wet sieving, and these are being dried out in the sun, and then they're going to be sorted into those different components. You can see immediately that you can see differences here. Some have got far more ceramics than others. Some are dominated by shells, by these edible mollusks, and others you've got far more in the way of faunal remains and ceramics. So there are clear differences that are going on here. And again, this just shows you the volume of material that's being recovered from these sites. So incredibly rich in terms of concentrations of faunal remains in particular, and also ceramics. So the ceramics are teaching us about the culture, about the way that they lived, about cooking utensils, about how they processed their food. And it can also teach us about mobility across Amazonia, so we can recognize commonalities among different Amazonian cultures across space and time. And what's so great about this project is that there are indigenous communities here that are working with us in this project. So we're examining cultural changes right up to the present day. So present day indigenous communities are extremely excited by being part of this project to really learn more about their long-term history in this region. Okay, let's walk down now to the bottom of the shell mound, and we can see the Oxbow Lake that's adjacent to this. And I'll say a few words about what we're trying to do in terms of the sediments within these lakes. So, I'm standing here on the edge of the shell mound, and you can see behind me this expanse of water with floating vegetation. So this is an oxbow lake, and that is adjacent to the shell mound. And so what I do is what is called paleoecology. So that's if you like my area of expertise. And so what we do is to take sediment cores from these lakes, and we analyze the fossil pollen and charcoal that's found preserved within the peat and within the sediment. So the pollen we can think of as a proxy for the vegetation. So different plants, different species or genera or families, they can be actually distinguished from each other by the morphology, by the anatomy of the pollen that they produce. So we can think of pollen grains, if you like, as a fingerprint for the plant. And so pollen is very well preserved within these lake sediments, and it stays well preserved over thousands, in fact millions of years. So what we're doing is taking these sediment cores, and we're taking samples of macrofossils like twigs, bits of wood, for radiocarbon dating to the University of Oxford. And these radiocarbon dates provide us with a chronology of environmental history. Right? So these sediment cores allow us to reconstruct the long-term history of the vegetation around these archaeological sites. And having this lake right next to the shell mound allows us to very closely integrate these paleoecological lines of evidence with the archaeological evidence. So by looking at the pollen, we can reconstruct the history, we can tell the history of rainforests, we can tell the extent to which humans have been managing these forests, we can try and identify those species which are more economically useful for people. In particular, the palms are especially useful for humans. So if we see an unusual abundance of palms in the fossil pollen record, that may be a good indicator that humans have been managing those forests and selecting those species which are more useful to them. Of course, there are lots of other species as well. We can recognize maize pollen. If there was maize cultivation, we can look at the charcoal that tells us about burning, the extent to which humans used fire as part of their land use strategy. We can also learn about the impact of past climatic changes. So not all of the changes to vegetation were caused by people. We know already that in some parts of Amazonia that there was an increase in rainfall over the last few thousand years that has facilitated the expansion of rainforest in response to that. So we've got this complex picture then. We've got a climatic-driven vegetation changes on the one hand. We've got humans and how they're using the landscape on the other hand. So what the project is about is to try and understand these complex relationships across space and through time.